The light from my phone was still burning a hole in my palm as I pushed open the heavy glass door of the diner. Eric's text was the last thing I saw before the bell above the door chimed. "I'm stuck at work," it said. Simple. Flat. A lie I had become accustomed to wearing like an old coat. I hadn't even cleared the notification when the server looked at me. He didn't offer a menu. He didn't ask if I was waiting for someone. He just spoke in that soft, practiced tone people use to tell you they're out of the daily special. "He's at table 5, the server said, his eyes dropping to the floor. "With his fiancée." I let out a breath, but it wasn't a gasp. It wasn't a sob. There was no heat of anger, no sudden sting of embarrassment. It felt, quite honestly, like hearing the final sentence of a book I had been reading for a very, very long time. I looked up at the ceiling. The diner's fluorescent light slid across the stainless steel tables, looking cold, hard, and flat. It was a perfect reflection of how I felt in that moment. To understand how I got to table 5, to understand why I wasn't screaming, you'd have to go back 3 months. My name is Viven. I'm a graphic designer at a small studio downtown. My entire life is built on the science of seeing. My eyes are trained to find the things that are slightly off, a line that's strayed by 2 pixels, a color profile that doesn't quite match the brand, a pocket of white space sitting in the wrong corner. In my world, details are everything. I'm used to noticing the things people try to hide, but there's a specific kind of blindness that happens when the person doing the hiding is your own husband. Eric was a project manager at a mid-sized tech firm. He was a man who lived his life in straight lines. Flat shirts, flat words, a flat, practiced smile. He knew exactly where to stand in a room to look like a man with a destination. At company parties, he was a master of the calm lean. He'd tilt his head just enough to make people feel like he was the only one with the solution to their problems. Anyone meeting him for the first time would swear he was headed straight for the corner office on the top floor. For a long time, I admired that. I thought ambition was a virtue. I didn't realize that ambition, when it gets hungry enough, needs a stage. And I was slowly becoming nothing more than the backdrop. The shift started 3 months ago. It wasn't a landslide, it was a hairline fracture. It started with the mirror. Eric had always been tidy, but suddenly, he became obsessed with the image in the glass. One morning, I watched him from the doorway. He fixed his collar, stepped back, frowned, and fixed it again. Then a third time. "Big meeting today?" I asked, leaning against the frame. "Not really," he replied. His voice was steady, but his eyes shifted to the left for a fraction of a second. "Just want to look professional, Viven. Image is everything in this quarter." He didn't look at me when he said it. He looked at the version of himself in the mirror. I filed it away, a small note in the back of my mind. Strange, I thought, but I let it go. I trusted him. That was my first mistake. Not the trust itself, but the duration of it. Then came the phone calls. We'd be getting ready for bed, the room quiet and intimate, and his phone would buzz. He'd take it into the hallway, his voice dropping into a register I hadn't heard in years. It was soft. It was the tone of a man trying to impress someone he was afraid of losing. "Yes, I understand," I heard him whisper once. "Thank you for the opportunity." When he came back into the room, his movements were too deliberate. "Who was that?" I asked. "Andrew," he said. He said it too fast. "Just a coworker, project logistics." I didn't argue. I didn't play the part of the suspicious wife. But as a designer, I knew when a composition was out of balance. Something about the way he said Andrew felt like a font that didn't belong on the page. Then the overtime started, the late-night dinners. He'd come home past midnight, smelling of expensive air and a faint floral perfume. When I mentioned the scent, he didn't even flinch. "The new coworker," he said effortlessly. "She stands too close when we're reviewing blueprints. It's a cramped office, Viven. Don't be that wife." He said it with a smile that was almost too kind. It was a patronizing kindness. I felt a thin, thread-like sensation tightening around my wrists, not heavy, just there. A reminder that I was being tethered to a lie I couldn't see yet. Then came the box. I found it in his jacket pocket while I was hanging it up. A small velvet square. My heart skipped. I thought, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this is for us. I opened it. Inside was a diamond ring. It wasn't huge, but it was flawless. High clarity, perfect cut. "Who did you buy this for?" I asked him the moment he walked into the room. I didn't lead up to it. I just held the truth in my open palm. Eric didn't even blink. He didn't stammer. He looked at the ring, then at me, with the most convincing expression of professional exhaustion I'd ever seen. "It's for a client, Viven, a female executive at the firm we're courting. It's a corporate incentive for hitting a milestone. I'm the lead on the account, so I had to pick it up." He said it with such total confidence that I felt a wave of shame wash over me. I felt like I was the one who was broken. I felt like the one who was overthinking. I closed the box, handed it back to him, and walked into the kitchen. My heart didn't hurt. It just went cold. It was the first time I realized that Eric wasn't just lying to me. He was performing for me. A few weeks later, the script changed. He started asking me questions that felt like he was testing a hypothesis. "Viven," he said one night over dinner, "if a man could give his wife a significantly better life, how do you think she should feel about the sacrifices he made to get there?" "It depends if the sacrifices were his to make," I replied. He went quiet. Then he asked, "Do you think someone has to look more trustworthy to actually be more trustworthy in business?" "I think as long as it's real, it doesn't matter how it looks," I said. Eric didn't respond. He just stared at his plate. In that silence, I saw it. He was living on two different stages. On one stage, with me, he was the calm, familiar husband. But on the other stage, the one with the perfume, the ring, and the Andrew who sounded like a woman, he was a man who wanted to be worth showing off. He was building a new character, and I was the only person who still remembered the original actor. The final straw wasn't a scream or a fight. It was 3 letters. Ali. The name Ali didn't just appear. It burned. It was a Tuesday evening, the kind of mundane Tuesday where the sun hangs low and orange, casting long, distorted shadows across the living room floor. Eric was heading out, another emergency strategy session. As he reached for his keys, his phone vibrated on the console table. The screen flared to life. "Ali, are you on your way?" He's asking about the timeline. 3 letters, a name that sounded like a song or a secret. It wasn't Andrew. It wasn't a project code. It was a person. Eric's hand moved with the speed of a predator, shoving the phone into his pocket before the screen could even dim. He turned to me and flashed that smile, the one I had started to realize was a mask. It was too perfect. It was the smile of a man who had practiced his exit in front of the mirror he loved so much. "I'll be late, Viven. Don't wait up," he said. He reached out to brush my cheek, but I felt my skin crawl. His touch felt like static electricity, sharp and artificial. When the door clicked shut, the silence in the house felt heavy, like it was filled with water. I sat down at the dining table and looked at the wood grain. As a designer, I knew that if you stare at a pattern long enough, the flaws start to emerge. The knots in the wood look like eyes, the scratches look like maps. I realized then that I had been staring at the pattern of our marriage, but I had been refusing to see the knots. A few days later, Eric came to me with a folder. He didn't come to me as a husband, he came to me as a salesman. He sat across from me, his hands laced together on the table, leaning in with that solution-oriented posture he used at his corporate galas. "Viven, I need your help with something," he began. His voice was low, melodic, and draped in a fake kind of vulnerability. "The firm is looking at me for the senior VP position. It's the move we've been waiting for, the top floor. But they're old school. They value stability. They value financial capability as a metric for leadership." I frowned. "Financial capability? Eric, you're a project manager, not a CFO. What does that have to do with your promotion?" "It's an internal process," he said, waving a hand dismissively as if I were a child asking why the sky is blue. "You wouldn't understand the corporate politics. It's complicated. Basically, I've hit my personal credit limit because of the investments I've been making for the firm's portfolio. To show I have the liquid backing for this new role, I need a bridge loan. Just a signature, Viven. Just this once." I looked at the documents. The numbers were large, larger than anything we had ever handled together. My intuition, The part of me that sees the pixels out of place was screaming. Why would a multi-million-dollar tech company care about a personal bridge loan for a VP? If they want you for your talent, I said slowly, why do they care about your personal bank account? Eric's face shifted. For a second, the mask slipped. His jaw tightened and his eyes turned cold. Because the world doesn't work on talent alone, Viven. It works on optics. If you want to be a leader, you have to look like a man who can handle wealth. Do you want this for us, or don't you? For us. Those were the words he used to hook me. He wasn't asking for a favor. He was questioning my loyalty. He was making me feel like I was the anchor dragging down his ship. So I signed. I watched my pen move across the paper, the ink soaking into the fibers. I signed for a loan that put my name, my credit, and my future on the line. I did it because I was still trying to be the woman who believed in her husband's ambition. I didn't realize I was actually signing the check for my own replacement. In the weeks that followed, the atmosphere in the house changed. Eric didn't become distant. He became festive. He was lighter, more energetic. He bought new suits, tailored, expensive wool that cost more than my monthly salary. He started talking about stability and legacy as if he were a king preparing a throne. But then, I began to hear the whispers. One night, the balcony door was cracked open. Eric was outside, pacing in the dark. I stood in the shadows of the kitchen, barely breathing. I know, he was saying into the phone. His voice was different now. It wasn't the flat tone he used with me, or the confident tone he used at work. It was desperate. It was the voice of a servant. I'm doing everything I can. Meeting him is a blessing. I just need more time to finalize the family aspect. She doesn't suspect a thing. The family aspect. She doesn't suspect a thing. The air in the kitchen felt thin. I leaned against the counter, my fingers gripping the edge so hard they turned white. He wasn't talking to a coworker. He was talking to someone about me. I was a variable in a calculation I didn't understand. I started doing what I do best. I started looking for the details. I waited until he was in the shower. I didn't check his phone. He kept that locked behind a biometric wall. Instead, I checked the things he thought were beneath my notice. I checked the laundry. I checked the trash. I checked the glove box of his car. I found a receipt for a florist. Not just any florist, one that specialized in high-end architectural arrangements, the kind you send to a gala or a wedding. The card wasn't addressed to me. It was addressed to a woman named Alicia. Allie. The puzzle pieces were starting to form a picture, but the picture made no sense. If he was having an affair, why the talk of promotions and financial capability? Why the diamond ring that he called a client gift? Why the loan in my name? Then I found the invitation. It was tucked into the back of his planner, hidden behind a flap of leather. It was heavy, cream-colored cardstock with gold-embossed lettering. It looked like an invitation to a private viewing or an exclusive dinner. The Sterling family requests the honor of your presence to celebrate the upcoming union of their daughter, Alicia Sterling, to Mr. Eric Vance. I stopped breathing. The room seemed to tilt on its axis. Upcoming union. Eric Vance. That was my husband's name. My husband, who was currently singing in the shower, was engaged to be married to someone named Alicia Sterling. The Allie from the texts. The daughter of a family that valued stability. The reason for the suits, the ring, and the loan. It wasn't just an affair. It was an ascension. Eric wasn't just cheating on me. He was auditioning for a new life. He was marrying into a dynasty, the Sterling family, owners of the very firm he worked for. And to get there, he needed to look like a man of means. He needed to look like he didn't need their money. He was using my credit, my signature, and my life to fund the lie he was telling them. I stood there in the bedroom, the invitation trembling in my hand. I could hear the water shut off in the bathroom. I could hear him whistling, a cheerful, upbeat tune. I had two choices. I could scream. I could confront him right there, in our bedroom, surrounded by the life we had built for 7 years. Or I could do what a designer does. I could wait. I could look for the pixels that were still out of alignment. I could find the one thread that, if pulled, would cause the entire tapestry of his lies to unravel in front of the only audience that mattered. I tucked the invitation back into the planner. I smoothed the leather. I walked back to the kitchen and started making tea. When Eric walked out, wrapped in a towel, smelling of expensive soap and betrayal, he looked at me and smiled. "You okay, Viv? You look a little pale." "I'm fine," I said, my voice as flat as his had ever been. "Just thinking about the future." "That's my girl," he said, kissing the top of my head. "The future is going to be bigger than you can even imagine." He had no idea how right he was. The next morning, the sun rose with a cruel sort of clarity. I watched Eric leave for work, his silhouette sharp and confident in one of those new charcoal suits. He looked like a man who owned the world, and in his mind, he probably did. I waited until his car turned the corner before I moved. I didn't go to the studio. I called in sick, the first time in 4 years. My voice didn't even tremble. I told them I had a migraine. It wasn't entirely a lie. My head felt like it was being squeezed by a vice, every thought a sharp, pulsing needle. I spent the first hour in silence, sitting on the floor of our walk-in closet. I looked at his shoes, lined up in perfect rows. I realized then that Eric wasn't just a liar. He was an architect. He had designed a life where I was the foundation, the solid, invisible base that held everything up while he built a glittering skyscraper on top of me. But foundations can be removed, and when they are, the building doesn't just lean, it collapses. I needed to see her. I needed to see the woman who was unknowingly, or perhaps knowingly, stepping into the space I still occupied. Alicia Sterling. The Sterling name wasn't hard to find. They were old money, the kind of wealth that doesn't scream but hums quietly in the background of the city's power structures. They owned Sterling Tech, the company Eric had claimed was considering him for a promotion. It wasn't a promotion he was chasing, it was a merger. A marriage into the board of directors. I found her through a charity gala listing. Alicia was hosting an opening at a boutique art gallery in the Pearl District that afternoon. It was a private viewing for friends and patrons. Perfect. I dressed carefully. As a designer, I knew the power of the visual. I didn't want to look like a scorned wife. I didn't want to look like I was hurting. I chose a structured black silk dress and a pair of vintage earrings. I pulled my hair back tight, sharp, professional, untouchable. I applied my lipstick like I was painting a masterpiece. Red, the color of blood and the color of warning. The gallery was a minimalist's dream, all white walls, high ceilings, and air that smelled of expensive perfume and chilled champagne. I walked in with my head high, a portfolio tucked under my arm as if I belonged there. No one stopped me. In rooms like this, if you look like you have a purpose, people assume you have a right to be there. And then I saw her. Alicia Sterling was standing in the center of the room, surrounded by a small circle of admirers. She was younger than me, perhaps by 5 years. She was beautiful in a way that felt effortless, soft, golden, and radiant. She didn't have the sharp edges I had developed. Why would she? She had never had to fight for a pixel in her life. She was wearing a cream-colored dress that matched the invitation I'd found in Eric's planner. I stood by a large abstract canvas, pretending to study the brushstrokes while I watched her. She laughed at something a man said, and the sound was light and genuine. My heart twisted. I wanted to hate her. I wanted to see a villain, but what I saw was a girl who looked like she was being sold a dream. Then I saw Eric. He entered from a side door, holding 2 glasses of champagne. The way he moved toward her was different from how he moved toward me. With me, he was the provider, the weary worker coming home to his backdrop. With her, he was the knight. He approached her with a look of such intense, manufactured devotion that it made my stomach turn. He leaned in, whispering something in her ear, and she beamed, leaning her head against his shoulder. "He's quite a catch, isn't he?" I jumped slightly. An older woman was standing next to me, squinting at the same painting I was pretending to admire. She had silver hair and a string of pearls that looked like they cost more than my house. "The fiancé," she continued, nodding toward Eric. "Eric Vance, a self-made man. It's rare to find someone so financially stable and grounded in this industry. Most of these young men are just chasing shadows, but Eric? He's the real deal. The Sterlings are very protective, you know. They wouldn't let just anyone into the family. I imagine they wouldn't, I said, my voice as smooth as glass. He looks very prepared. Oh, he is. He's already invested heavily in the Sterling Foundation, showed incredible initiative, proved he was a man of substance before he even asked for her hand. The loan. The pieces clicked into place with a sickening thud. The loan I had signed, the money Eric said was for a bridge to a promotion, hadn't gone to a company. It had gone to her family's foundation. He had used my credit to buy his way into their trust. He had literally used my life as collateral to purchase his entry into hers. I felt a surge of cold, liquid rage. It wasn't the kind of rage that makes you want to scream. It was the kind that makes you want to burn everything to the ground and watch the embers. I stayed in the shadows, watching them. I watched Eric shake hands with Alicia's father, a man who looked like he could crush a person's career with a single phone call. I watched Eric play the part of the successful, wealthy suitor. He was brilliant. If I didn't know him, I would have believed him too. He had the vocabulary of wealth, the posture of success, and the ring, the diamond ring he'd told me was a client gift, was now sparkling on Alicia's finger. I walked toward the exit, my heels clicking rhythmically on the polished concrete. But as I reached the door, I stopped. I turned back one last time. Eric was looking across the room, his eyes scanning the crowd. For a split second, our eyes met. The color drained from his face. It was almost imperceptible, a slight widening of the pupils, a momentary stiffening of his shoulders. The self-made man hit a glitch in his programming. He didn't wave. He didn't acknowledge me. He looked away instantly, refocusing his attention on Alicia as if I were a ghost he could simply choose not to believe in. But I wasn't a ghost, and I wasn't a backdrop anymore. I walked out of the gallery and into the bright afternoon light. I didn't cry. I sat in my car and took a deep breath. My mind, the designer's mind, was already working. I was looking at the layout of his lies. I was seeing where the kerning was off, where the colors bled, where the structure was weak. Eric wanted a stage. He wanted an audience. He wanted the Sterlings to see a man of perfect stability. I reached into my bag and pulled out the loan documents I'd kept a copy of. My signature was there, clear and bold. And his was there too, right next to mine. A legal binding, a paper trail that led directly from our shared bed to the Sterlings' front door. I started the car. I knew exactly what the next move was. It wasn't time to confront the husband. It was time to meet the father-in-law. But first, I needed to talk to Alicia, not as a wife and not as a victim. I needed to show her the pixels she was missing. The drive home was the quietest 30 minutes of my life. I didn't turn on the radio. I didn't check my phone. I just listened to the hum of the tires and thought about the word stability. It's a funny word. In design, stability is about balance, ensuring that the weight of an image is distributed so it doesn't feel like it's tipping over. Eric had built a massive gilded structure on one side of his life, but he'd forgotten that the other side, the side where I stood, was the only thing keeping it upright. When I got home, I didn't change out of my black dress. I went straight to my home office. I sat at my desk, the glow of the dual monitors reflecting in my eyes. I am a designer. I know how to create things that look official. I know how to package information so it is undeniable. I pulled up the loan documents. I scanned the signature page. Then I pulled up our joint bank statements from the last 3 months. I tracked the money. The loan had hit our account on a Tuesday. By Wednesday, it had been transferred out, not to a corporate account, but to a private offshore entity that Eric had disguised with a name that sounded vaguely like a consulting firm, EV Strategic Partners. Then I did something I had never done before. I used my skills for something other than a brand identity. I began to build a dossier. I didn't want to just tell the truth. I wanted the truth to be an experience. I wanted Alicia and her father to see the pixels exactly the way I saw them. I started by creating a digital timeline. Every late night Eric worked, every client gift that matched a charge on our credit card, every mile on his car that didn't add up to his stories, but I knew a direct confrontation would be too easy for Eric to spin. He was a project manager. He was trained to mitigate risks. If I walked up to him, he'd call me crazy, bitter, or unstable. He'd tell the Sterlings I was a disgruntled ex-employee or a distant relative with a grudge. No, to take down a man who lives by the image, you have to ruin the image itself. I started small. I knew Alicia's Instagram handle from the gallery's promotional tag. She lived a life of curated beauty, tulips in crystal vases, sketches for her upcoming wedding, and candid shots of Eric looking heroic. I created a new anonymous account. No profile picture, no bio. I sent her a single message, no text, just a high-resolution photo of the receipt for the diamond ring, the one Eric said was for a client, placed next to our marriage certificate. I watched the scene notification appear almost instantly. My heart hammered against my ribs like a bird in a cage. 1 pixel out of place, I thought. Just one. An hour later, Eric came home. He was buzzing with the energy of the gallery event, but beneath it, I could see the cracks. He was checking his phone every 30 seconds. He was restless. "Everything okay?" I asked, stirring a pot of pasta I wasn't actually going to eat. "Fine," he snapped, then softened his voice, catching himself. "Just a lot of pressure at the firm, Viv. You know how it is. These high-level promotions, they take everything out of you." "I'm sure they do," I said. "By the way, I saw a charge on the joint account for a florist in Midtown, the Sterling collection. Was that for the same client who got the ring?" Eric froze. He was halfway through pouring a glass of wine. The liquid splashed over the rim, staining the white marble countertop. It looked like a wound. "Yeah," he said, his voice a bit too high. "The Sterlings, they're the biggest fish in the pond. We have to keep them happy. Why are you looking at the statements anyway? I told you I'd handle the finances this month." "I just like to see where the lines go, Eric. It's what I do." He wiped the wine with a paper towel, his movements frantic. "Well, stop. You're overthinking it. You're getting that look in your eyes. Just trust me, okay? We're almost there. Once this VP spot is locked in, we're moving. New house, new city if we want. A fresh start." A fresh start. He meant a clean break. He meant he was waiting for the ink to dry on his marriage to Alicia so he could ghost the life he had with me. The house, the debt, the Viven chapter. He planned to leave it all behind like a discarded draft. That night, while Eric lay awake in bed, I could hear his breathing, heavy and uneven. I went back to the office. I had found something else. In Eric's digital history, he had been researching marriage annulment and liability transfer. He wasn't just planning to leave me. He was planning to pin the bridge loan entirely on me. He was setting it up to look like I was the one who had taken the money, and he was the victim of my financial instability. That was the family aspect he had mentioned on the balcony. He was telling the Sterlings that his current situation, me, was a burden he was bravely trying to resolve. My blood went cold. He wasn't just replacing me, he was destroying me to make his climb easier. I felt a strange, calm clarity wash over me. The kind of clarity you get when a design finally clicks. I realized that I couldn't just be a ghost. I had to be the lead designer of his downfall. I picked up the phone and made a call. Not to Eric, not to a lawyer. I called the gallery. "Hello," I said, my voice steady. "I was at the viewing this afternoon. I'm a colleague of Eric Vance. I believe I left a very important folder of financial disclosures for Mr. Sterling. Is there a way I can have it delivered directly to his private office tomorrow morning?" The receptionist, sounding impressed by the mention of the Sterlings, gave me exactly what I needed. I spent the rest of the night printing. I printed the loan agreement. I printed the bank transfers to EV Strategic Partners. I printed the photos of Eric at our wedding 5 years ago, looking exactly the same as he did in the photos with Alicia. I put it all in a thick black envelope. On the front, I didn't write, "To Mr. Sterling." I wrote, "The proof of stability." As the sun began to peek through the blinds, I realized the first 5 minutes of Eric's new life were about to become a nightmare. I wasn't just a backdrop. I was the wall he was about to run into at full speed. But there was one more person who needed to see the full picture before the curtain fell. I waited for Eric to leave for work. This time, I didn't watch him from the window. I followed him. Not to his office. I followed him to the diner. Table 5, the place where he was meeting Alicia for breakfast before they went to finalize their plans. The server looked at me as I walked in. He knew. The whole world seemed to know. "Table 5?" I whispered. The server nodded slowly. "He's already there. With her." I took a breath. It was time to show them the final edit. The diner smelled of burnt coffee and maple syrup, the scent of ordinary mornings. It was a place for people with nothing to hide, people catching a quick bite before a long shift. It was the last place you'd expect to see a man like Eric, yet there he was. He was leaning across the laminate tabletop, his hands covering Alicia's. From a distance, they looked like a postcard for happily ever after. I stood by the coat rack for a moment, just watching. I was Viven, the designer again, looking at the composition. The way the morning sun hit the sugar shaker. The way Eric's thumb stroked the back of Alicia's hand. The same gesture he used to use on me when he wanted to win an argument without raising his voice. I didn't feel like a victim. I felt like a judge. I walked toward table 5. My heels didn't click on the linoleum. The sound was swallowed by the chatter of the breakfast crowd. I was 3 feet away when Eric finally sensed a shift in the air. He looked up, his rehearsed smile ready for a waiter. Then he saw me. The transformation was fascinating. His eyes didn't just widen, they went hollow. The color left his lips, leaving them looking like 2 gray lines on a page. He didn't pull his hands away from Alicia. He froze, his fingers twitching against her skin like a dying nerve. "Viven?" His voice was a rasp, a ghost of its usual confident baritone. Alicia turned, her brow furrowing in confusion. She looked at me, then back at Eric, then at me again. She recognized me from the gallery. I could see the memory flickering in her eyes, the woman in the black dress who had been staring at the abstract painting. "Eric?" she asked, her voice high and sweet. "Who is this?" I didn't wait for him to answer. I pulled out the chair at the head of the table and sat down. I placed my designer handbag on the table with a heavy thud. "I'm the person who signed for the suit he's wearing," I said, my voice calm, conversational. I looked directly at Alicia. "I'm also the person who signed for that ring on your finger, though in the paperwork Eric gave me, it was listed as a corporate incentive for a female executive. I suppose he wasn't lying about the female part." Alicia's hand instinctively went to the ring, her fingers curling over the diamond. Eric, what is she talking about?" Eric finally found his breath. He scrambled for the mask, trying to shove it back onto his face. "Alicia, honey, please, this is the woman I told you about. My former associate. She's been having a very difficult time, mentally. She's obsessed with the project I'm running." He looked at me, his eyes pleading, burning with a silent threat. "Viven, you need to leave, now. We can discuss your severance later. Don't do this here." "Severance?" I laughed. It was a short, sharp sound that cut through the noise of the diner. "Eric, you're confused. You don't give severance to a wife of 7 years, especially not one who still holds the deed to the house you're planning to sell to invest in the Sterling Foundation." The word wife hit the table like a lead weight. Alicia recoiled as if I'd slapped her. She pulled her hands away from Eric's, her eyes darting between us. "Wife? Eric, you said you were single. You said you were completely unattached and focused only on your career." "I am!" Eric shouted, then immediately lowered his voice, his eyes darting around to see if the other patrons were watching. "Alicia, it's complicated. We're separated. Legally. She's bitter about the settlement." "We aren't separated, Eric," I said, reaching into my bag. I pulled out a small framed photo I'd taken from our hallway, a picture of us from last Christmas, laughing in front of a tree. I slid it across the table. It came to rest right next to Alicia's coffee cup. "This was taken 3 months ago, the same week you started working late with Alicia." Alicia picked up the photo. Her face crumpled. She wasn't the other woman in a movie. She was a girl who had been scammed. I could see the realization dawning on her, the little inconsistencies, the phone calls he took in private, the way he never invited her to his home. "You used me," she whispered, looking at Eric. "No, Alicia, I love you," Eric pleaded. He reached for her, but she pulled back, her chair scraping loudly against the floor. "Did you use her money to buy my ring?" Alicia asked, her voice trembling. "It's not like that," Eric stammered. "It was an investment in our future. I was going to pay it all back once the merger went through. I was doing it for us." "There is no us in a debt that starts with a lie, Eric," I interrupted. I turned my gaze back to Alicia. "But the ring is the least of your problems. Has he told you about the Sterling Foundation donation? The one he made in his name to prove his financial capability to your father?" Alicia blinked. "My father he was impressed. He said Eric was a man of substance." "He's a man of my substance," I said. I pulled out the copy of the bridge loan. "This is a $50,000 loan. It's in my name. The funds were transferred to an account called EV Strategic Partners. That's Eric's shell company. He took the money I thought was for his promotion and used it to buy your father's respect." I leaned in closer, my voice dropping to a whisper that felt like a blade. "He didn't just lie to you about being single, Alicia. He's using my credit to audition for your life. And when the loan comes due, he's already researched how to leave me with the debt while he moves into your guest house." Alicia looked at the loan document. She looked at the signature. Then she looked at the ring on her finger. With a jerky, violent motion, she twisted the ring off her finger and slammed it onto the table. It bounced once and rolled toward the salt shaker. "My father is going to kill you," she said to Eric. It wasn't a threat. It was a cold, hard fact. Eric looked at the ring. Then he looked at me. The mask was gone now. The straight-line man was crooked, his face twisted into something ugly, something feral. "You bitch," he hissed at me. "You just ruined everything. Do you have any idea what I worked for? Do you have any idea what kind of life I was trying to build?" "You weren't building a life, Eric," I said, standing up. "You were designing a fraud, and you forgot the first rule of design. If the structure isn't honest, it won't hold the weight." Alicia stood up too. She didn't look at Eric. She looked at me. "I'm sorry," she said. "Don't be," I replied. "You're just a detail he tried to misplace. I suggest you go home and tell your father to check the Foundation's books. I imagine EV Strategic Partners has a few more surprises waiting for him." Alicia turned and walked out of the diner, her head held high. Eric sat there, slumped in the booth. He looked small. The charcoal suit looked 2 sizes too big for him now. He looked like a man who had reached for the top floor and ended up in the basement. I picked up the ring from the table. I weighed it in my hand. "What are you going to do?" Eric asked, his voice hollow. "I'm going to go to the jeweler," I said. "I'm going to return this, and then I'm going to use the refund to pay off the first installment of the loan you stuck me with. After that, well, Eric, the rest of the debt is going to be your problem. I've already sent a copy of that EV Strategic Partners transfer to the bank's fraud department." I looked down at him one last time. "The curtain is down, Eric. The show's over." I walked out of the diner. The sun was higher now, bright and warm. For the first time in 3 months, the world didn't look flat. It looked deep, complex, and perfectly, beautifully real. The air outside the diner was crisp, a sharp contrast to the suffocating tension of Table 5. I watched Alicia's car pull away, a streak of silver disappearing into the morning traffic. She was gone, and with her, Eric's carefully constructed ladder to the top floor had evaporated. But as I stood there on the sidewalk, the diamond ring heavy in my pocket, I didn't feel the rush of victory I expected. Instead, I felt that designer's itch, the feeling that one line was still crooked. I got into my car and sat for a moment, my hands gripping the steering wheel. Eric was a project manager. Project managers don't just have a plan B, they have a contingency for their contingency. He had been too quiet when I mentioned the fraud department. He hadn't panicked the way a man who had lost everything should. He had just looked hollow. My phone buzzed. A notification from our home security app. Front door opened. He was going home. He wasn't going to the office to pack his desk. He was going to our house. I drove back, my heart racing, not with fear, but with a cold, calculated focus. I knew exactly what he was after. In the back of our shared office, behind a loose panel in the built-in bookshelf, Eric kept a legacy folder. He told me it was just tax returns and old contracts, but in the world of Eric Vance, nothing was just what it seemed. When I pulled into the driveway, his car was parked at an angle, the driver's side door still hanging open. He was in a rush. I walked through the front door. The house felt different. It didn't feel like a home anymore. It felt like a crime scene. I heard the sound of drawers being slammed upstairs. I didn't rush. I walked to the kitchen, grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from the counter, a habit of mine when I needed something to ground me, and headed up the stairs. I found him in the office. The bookshelf had been swung open, and he was on his knees, frantically shoving documents into a leather briefcase. "Looking for the family stability files?" I asked, leaning against the doorframe. Eric jumped, nearly knocking over a lamp. He looked haggard. The sweat had ruined the collar of his expensive suit, the one I had helped him pick out. "Viven, stay out of this. You've already done enough. You've destroyed a career that was going to take care of you for the rest of your life." "I don't need taking care of by a ghost, Eric," I said, my voice dropping to that low, dangerous register. "What's in the bag?" "It's mine. Personal records. Stuff you wouldn't understand." "Try me. I'm quite good at understanding complicated things lately." He snapped the briefcase shut and stood up, trying to regain some of that old height. "You think you're so smart. You think you caught me. But you have no idea how deep this goes. That loan? That was just the tip. I've moved the equity from the house, Viven. I've leveraged our shared assets into the Sterling merger months ago." I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. "The equity? How? You need both signatures for that." Eric's smile returned, but it wasn't the flat, polite smile from before. It was a jagged, desperate thing. "I'm a project manager, Viv. I manage resources. And you're a designer. You're so focused on the pixels that you miss the whole page. I've been practicing your signature for 6 months. It's perfect. Even you couldn't tell the difference." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. Forgery. He hadn't just used my trust. He had stolen my identity. He had turned me into a silent partner in my own financial execution. "You're a monster," I whispered. "No," he hissed, stepping toward me. "I'm a man who refused to be a backdrop. I was going to make it, Viven. I was going to be the name on the building. And if you hadn't shown up at that diner, I would have been. Now I'm just taking what's left and I'm leaving. You can have the house, or what's left of it after the bank realizes the payments have stopped." He tried to push past me, but I didn't move. I looked at the briefcase. "You're not going anywhere with those files, Eric." "Watch me." He shoved me aside, his shoulder hitting mine with a force that sent me stumbling. I watched him run down the stairs. I heard the front door slam. I heard his car engine roar to life and the screech of tires as he peeled away. I didn't chase him. I didn't call the police. Not yet. I walked back into the office and looked at the hole behind the bookshelf. He had been in such a hurry that he'd dropped a single sheet of paper. It was a ledger. Not for EV Strategic Partners, but for something else. The Sterling Foundation, Private Donor Registry. I scanned the names, and there it was. Not Eric Vance, not Alicia Sterling. The name on the registry, the one who had donated the $50,000 from my loan, was Andrew. I froze. Andrew. The name he had used for the phone calls. The name he said was a coworker. I pulled out my laptop and began to dig. I didn't look for people named Andrew. I looked for the account named Andrew. It took me 20 minutes of navigating through layers of encrypted subfolders. Eric was good, but he wasn't a programmer, and then I found it. Andrew wasn't a person. ANDREW was an acronym for a high-yield offshore investment bot he'd been using to wash the money he was skimmed from his firm. But there was a second name attached to the account, a secondary beneficiary. It wasn't Alicia. It was a name I recognized from the graphic design studio, a name from my world. The blood drained from my face. The pixels weren't just out of place in my marriage, they were out of place in my office. My phone rang. It was an unknown number. I answered it, my voice barely a whisper. Hello? Viven? The voice on the other end was familiar, soft, professional. It's Sarah from the studio. We need you to come in. There's been a discrepancy in the client billing for the Sterling account. It looks like someone's been using our design servers to host some unusual financial data. I looked at the ledger in my hand. I looked at the name Andrew on the screen. The betrayal wasn't a straight line, it was a circle, and I was standing right in the center of it. Eric hadn't just been cheating on me with a woman. He had been cheating on the world with a ghost he'd created using my job, my signature, and my life. I grabbed my keys. I'm on my way, I said. I had thought the show was over at the diner, but as I drove toward the studio, I realized that was just the intermission. The real performance was about to begin, and this time, I wasn't going to be the audience. I was going to be the one who wrote the ending. The studio was quiet, the kind of silence that feels fragile, like a thin sheet of glass waiting to be shattered. This was my sanctuary. This was where the world made sense, where I could control every curve of a letter and every shade of a gradient. But as I walked through the glass doors, the familiar scent of expensive coffee and printer ink felt sour. Sarah was standing by my desk. She was the studio's lead project coordinator, the person who handled the bridge between the creative team and the clients. She was sharp, efficient, and always perfectly composed. She didn't look composed now. She looked like she had seen a ghost. "Viven, thank God you're here," she whispered, pulling me into the small conference room. "What's happened, Sarah? You mentioned the Sterling account." She opened her laptop and spun it around. "I was doing a routine audit of the cloud servers this morning. We've been seeing a massive amount of data being pushed through the Sterling brand identity folder, way more than a few high-res logos and style guides. When I looked closer, I found this." She clicked through a series of directories. Deep inside the assets for the Sterling Foundation was a hidden partition. It wasn't full of graphics. It was full of transaction logs. Thousands of them. "Someone has been using our secure client portal as a digital laundromat," Sarah said, her voice trembling. "They've been routing small, untraceable amounts of money through the design fees, then pushing them out to an external account, an account called ANDREW. I felt the room go cold. I reached out to the table to steady myself. "And who has access to this folder, Sarah, besides me?" Sarah looked at me, her eyes filled with a mixture of pity and fear. "Only 2 people have the administrative override codes, Viven. Me and the client liaison." "And who is the liaison for the Sterling account?" I already knew the answer. I could see the pixels aligning in my head, forming a picture so ugly it made my skin crawl. "It was a new arrangement," Sarah said, "requested by the Sterling Foundation themselves 3 months ago. They wanted a direct line to someone they trusted. They requested Eric Vance." I sat down, the air leaving my lungs. Eric hadn't just been using me for my signature. He had been using my career as a cloak. He had positioned himself as the middleman between the Sterlings and my studio. He was skimming from the very firm that was supposed to be his future family, and he was hiding the evidence in the very place I spent 10 hours a day. He had been standing right behind me, metaphorically and literally, while he gutted my life. "He used my login, didn't he?" I asked. Sarah nodded slowly. "The timestamps matched the nights he stayed late to bring you dinner or wait for you to finish a deadline. He wasn't being a supportive husband, Viven. He was using your workstation because it was already inside the firewall." I looked at the screen. The Andrew bot was still active. I could see the numbers flickering. $5 here, $50 there. It was a slow, steady bleed. It was genius in a horrific way. It was too small for a bank to flag, but over 3 months it had added up to a fortune. But then I saw something Sarah hadn't mentioned, a line of code that looked out of place. I leaned in, my eyes narrowing. "Sarah, look at the outbound destination for this morning's transfer." She peered at the screen. It's a different IP address. It's a travel portal. A private jet charter? My heart stopped. Eric wasn't just running. He was launching. He knew the diner confrontation was the end of the Eric Vance the husband performance. He was moving to the final act. Eric Vance, the fugitive. He was using the last of the laundered money to disappear before the Sterlings, the bank, or I could lay a hand on him. "Where is it going?" I demanded. "The flight is scheduled for 2 hours from now," Sarah said, her fingers flying across the keys. "A private terminal at the regional airport. Destination, Grand Cayman." I stood up. The coldness I had felt at the diner was gone. In its place was a white-hot, vibrating energy. Eric thought he was a master of details. He thought he could move through my world and leave no trace because I was too focused on the pixels. He was wrong. Because if you change one pixel in a master file, the whole checksum changes, and I was the only one who knew how to read the error code. "Sarah, I need you to do something for me," I said, my voice as hard as a diamond. "Can you lock him out? Not the whole system, just the Andrew partition. Make it look like a server glitch. Give him an error message that says, 'Action pending, manual signature required.'" Sarah caught on immediately. A small, vengeful smile touched her lips. "You want to bait the trap." "He needs that money to leave," I said. "If he can't access the funds, he can't pay the charter, and if he sees that manual signature prompt, he'll think he needs me one last time." "He'll come back to you," Sarah whispered. "No," I said, looking at my reflection in the dark conference room window. "He'll come to the one place he thinks I'm still too busy to notice. He'll come back here, to my desk." I walked out of the conference room and sat down at my workstation. I opened my design software. I didn't work on a client project. I opened the scan of the forged signature Eric had been so proud of. I looked at it for a long time. It was good. It was almost perfect. But there was a slight tremor in the V, a micro-measurement of guilt he didn't even know he had. I began to edit. I didn't fix the signature. I broke it. I added a digital watermark, invisible to the eye but loud as a siren to a bank's verification software, a watermark that said, "Forgery." I saved the file into the Andrew partition. Now I waited. The studio grew darker as the afternoon sun moved behind the skyline. One by one, my coworkers left, offering me sympathetic glances they thought I didn't see. Sarah stayed in the back office, her hand on the kill switch for the server. Then I heard it. The heavy glass doors at the front of the studio creaked open. The footsteps were fast, heavy, and lacked the usual rhythm of a man with direction. Eric was here. I didn't turn around. I kept my eyes on my monitor, my fingers moving across the keyboard as if I were finishing a layout. I could feel his presence behind me, the scent of his expensive, sweat-ruined suit, and the desperate, ragged heat of his breath. "Viven," he rasped. I didn't look back. "You're late for your flight, Eric. Grand Cayman is beautiful this time of year, or so I've heard." The silence that followed was thick enough to choke on. "How?" he hissed. "You told me once that I wouldn't understand your environment," I said, finally spinning my chair around. I looked him dead in the eye. He looked like a cornered animal, teeth bared, eyes wide and bloodshot. "But you forgot that your environment is built on my platform. You're standing in my world now, Eric. And in this world, I see everything." He lunged for my mouse, his hand shaking. "Give me the signature, Viven. Authorize the transfer. I know you put a lock on it. Just sign it, and you'll never see me again. I'll leave you the house. I'll leave you everything." "You already left me everything, Eric," I said, standing up to face him. "The debt, the forgery, the shame. You don't have anything left to give." "Sign it!" he screamed, his face turning a deep, bruised purple. "I already did," I said, pointing to the screen. On the monitor, the action pending box changed. It didn't say success. It didn't say transfer complete. It said, "Security breach detected. Authorities notified." Outside, in the distance, I heard the first faint wail of a siren. The sound of the siren was thin at first, a needle prick of noise in the distance. but as it drew closer, it began to fill the room, bouncing off the glass walls of the studio. Eric's head snapped toward the window. The panic in his eyes was no longer the frantic energy of a man trying to win. It was the hollow, vibrating terror of a man who had realized the floor beneath him was gone. He turned back to me, his hands grasping the edge of my desk so hard the knuckles turned white. "You think you've won?" he whispered, his voice cracking. "Viven, look at the screen. Look at the logs. Your username, your IP address, your workstation. If I go down, you go down with me. That's how I designed it. I'm a project manager, remember? I account for every variable. You are the primary suspect." I didn't blink. I didn't even flinch. I just leaned back against the desk and crossed my arms. "You're right, Eric. On paper, it looks exactly like I was the one skimming the money. It looks like I was the one using the Sterling account to fund an offshore life. It's a very clean design. A bit too clean, actually." The blue and red lights began to pulse against the office ceiling, rhythmic and cold. "I already told them, Viven," Eric shouted over the growing noise of the sirens. He pulled his phone from his pocket, his thumb hovering over a pre-written email. "One click, and the Sterling board gets an anonymous tip about your financial instability. I'll tell them you were desperate, that you forced me to help you. Who are they going to believe? The successful project manager who was about to marry their daughter? Or the bitter wife with the digital trail leading right to her chair?" "The thing about digital trails, Eric," I said, my voice cutting through his hysteria with a surgical precision, "is that they don't just show where you went. They show how you move. Every designer has a signature, not a name, but a rhythm. The way they use a mouse, the keyboard shortcuts they prefer, the exact pressure they apply to a stylus. It's like a fingerprint." I pointed to a second monitor that Eric hadn't noticed, the one Sarah had been monitoring from the back. "I've been recording your session for the last 10 minutes, I said. "Every frantic click, every attempt to override the manual signature lock. And more importantly, I have the biometric data from the office door. You didn't use a key card to get in tonight, Eric. You used a master override code that you stole from the IT closet last month. But you forgot one thing. That closet has a dedicated analog camera." The front doors of the studio burst open. Heavy footsteps thudded across the lobby. "Police! Nobody move!" Eric didn't move. He didn't run. He just stared at the screen, watching the recording of his own hands desperately trying to steal the last $50,000. 2 officers rounded the corner, their tasers drawn but lowered. Behind them stood a man in a dark, tailored suit. Not a policeman, but someone far more dangerous to a man like Eric. It was Mr. Sterling. He didn't look like a grieving father or a victim of a scam. He looked like a man who was about to delete a nuisance. He walked past the officers and stood 5 feet from Eric. The silence in the room was absolute, save for the hum of the cooling fans in the servers. "Mr. Sterling," Eric stammered, his face twisting into a pathetic, reflexive smile. "Sir, I can explain. Viven, she's had a breakdown. She's been manipulating the accounts. I came here to stop her. I was trying to protect the foundation." Mr. Sterling didn't look at Eric. He looked at me. "Is it done?" I nodded. I reached over and clicked the final export button on my terminal. "The full dossier has been sent to your legal team, Mr. Sterling. It includes the original loan forgery, the ANDREW bot logs, and the travel itinerary for the 7 p.m. charter to Grand Cayman." Eric's jaw dropped. He looked between me and the man he thought was his ticket to the top floor. You were talking to her? When?" "Since the moment she walked out of the gallery," Mr. Sterling said, his voice like grinding stones. "My daughter may be young, Eric, but she is a Sterling. She knows when a person is overselling a vision. And Viven here? She knows how to provide the data to back up a gut feeling." Mr. Sterling finally turned his gaze to Eric. It was a look of pure clinical disgust. "You used my daughter. You used my company, and you used a woman who was too good for you. You thought you were playing in our league, but you're just a low-level thief with an expensive tailor." The officers moved in. They grabbed Eric by the arms, pulling him away from the desk. He didn't fight. He went limp, his feet dragging against the carpet. The straight-line man was finally broken, his posture collapsing into a jagged, messy shape. "Wait!" Eric yelled as they led him toward the door. He twisted his head back to look at me. "Viven, the loan! It's still in your name! You're still ruined! You'll never pay it back!" I stood up and walked toward him. I waited until we were inches apart, until he could see the lack of fear in my eyes. "The loan was taken out under fraudulent circumstances, Eric," I said softly. "The bank has already seen the forgery report, but more importantly, Mr. Sterling has agreed to buy the debt, as a consulting fee for the work I did today in saving his foundation $3 million in laundered assets." I reached out and straightened his collar one last time, a mockery of the gesture he used to perform in the mirror. "You were right about one thing, Eric. Image is everything. And right now, you look like exactly what you are." I pulled his hand away from his side and tucked a small slip of paper into his breast pocket. It was the receipt for the diamond ring. "A gift for your new client," I whispered, "the state prosecutor." As the police led him out into the night, the sirens finally fell silent. The studio was dark except for the glow of my monitors. Mr. Sterling offered me a brief, respectful nod before following them out, leaving me alone in the space I had worked so hard to protect. I sat back down at my desk. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just looked at the screen. I opened a new file, a blank canvas, perfectly white, perfectly empty. I took a deep breath and reached for the mouse. For the first time in years, the lines were all mine. The week following Eric's arrest felt like living in the white space of a draft. The noise had stopped, but the structure was still missing. I spent my days at the studio and my nights in a house that felt too large, filled with the echoes of a man who had never really been there. I began the process of dismantling. It wasn't just about packing boxes. It was about reclaiming the geometry of my life. I walked through each room with a roll of industrial tape and a stack of cartons. Every item I touched felt like a prop from a play that had been canceled mid-performance. The espresso machine he insisted we buy to look sophisticated. The minimalist art that he chose because it looked expensive rather than because he liked it. By Thursday, the living room was a graveyard of cardboard. I was down to the last few items in the office, the scene of his final, desperate scramble. I was pulling the books off the shelves when I noticed it. A small black USB drive, wedged deep into the crevice of the floorboards, right where the legacy folder had been hidden. It must have fallen out when Eric shoved me. I sat at my desk and stared at it for a long time. Part of me wanted to crush it under my heel. I had won. The debt was being handled by the Sterling lawyers, the divorce was being fast-tracked on grounds of fraud, and Eric was sitting in a cell awaiting his first hearing. I should have been done. But I'm a designer. I can't leave a stray line on the page. I plugged the drive into my laptop. It wasn't encrypted. It didn't contain more bank logs or offshore accounts. It contained one single folder titled The Final Submission. Inside were hundreds of photos, not of Alicia, not of me. They were photos of blueprints, architectural renderings, and site photos of an old, crumbling warehouse on the edge of the industrial district. I frowned, scrolling through the images. Attached to the photos was a contract, not with the Sterlings, and not with the tech firm. It was a private purchase agreement in Eric's name dated 2 years ago, long before the Ali affair, long before the promotion drama. Eric hadn't been trying to buy his way into a boardroom. He had been trying to buy that building. I looked closer at the renderings. It wasn't an office. It was a gallery. A massive, breathtaking space for artists and designers. The notes in the margins were in Eric's handwriting, but the tone was different. There were no flat words or corporate optics here. "The light in the north corner is perfect for high-contrast installations," one note read. "The ceiling height needs to be maintained to allow for scale. Viven would love the acoustics here." I felt a sharp, cold knot form in my chest. I kept scrolling. There were sketches of a studio space, a private, state-of-the-art design suite with my name on the door. He had planned the ventilation, the light wells, the exact height of the drafting tables to match my preferences. The $3 million he had been skimming? It wasn't for a private jet to the Caymans, not originally. The flight was a desperate escape plan, but the goal, the original project, had been this. He had been stealing from the rich to build a kingdom for us. But Eric was a man who didn't know how to be honest, even when he was being kind. He had decided that the only way to give me the life he thought I deserved was to lie to me, to use me, and to betray everyone around him. He had turned a dream into a crime because he didn't believe that hard work and a backdrop wife were enough to get there. He had tried to design a miracle using a crooked compass. I sat in the dark office, the glow of the screen illuminating the room. I realized then that the most dangerous lie Eric ever told wasn't to me or the Sterlings. It was the lie he told himself, that the end justifies the means, that you can build a temple out of stolen bricks and expect it to stand. I looked at the rendering of the studio with my name on it. It was beautiful. It was everything I had ever wanted, and it was poisoned. I reached for my phone. I didn't call my lawyer. I called the detective in charge of the Sterling fraud case. "Detective Miller? This is Viven Vance. I found something else. A warehouse on 4th and Industrial." "We know about the property, Mrs. Vance," the detective said, his voice weary. "It's been flagged for seizure. Why?" "I want to know if there's a way to keep the architectural plans," I said, my voice steady. "Not for the property, just the design." "I don't see why not. It's mostly just paper now." I hung up and looked back at the screen. I saw the pixels for what they really were. Eric had tried to create a masterpiece by forging the signature of a life he hadn't earned. He thought he was the architect, but he was just the demolition crew. I dragged the folder into the trash bin. The final submission disappeared from the screen. The studio with my name on it vanished. The light wells and the north corner acoustics were gone. I felt a single tear roll down my cheek, not for the man in the cell, but for the man I thought I knew 2 years ago, the one who noticed the light in the north corner. I closed the laptop and stood up. I walked to the window and looked out at the city. The shadows were long, but the lines of the buildings were sharp and true. Tomorrow, I would sell the house. Tomorrow, I would sign the final papers. Tomorrow, I would start a new project. And this time, I wouldn't be anyone's backdrop. The visitor's room at the county jail was the most honest place I had ever seen Eric. There were no stainless steel tables polished to a mirror finish, no warm diner lights, and no expensive suits to hide the man underneath. There was just thick, scratched plexiglass and the smell of industrial-grade disinfectant. I sat down and picked up the handset. On the other side of the glass, Eric looked smaller than I ever thought possible. He was wearing an orange jumpsuit that clashed violently with his pale skin. The perfect hair was gone, replaced by a buzzed cut that revealed the true shape of his head, unprotected and fragile. He looked at me, and for the first time in 7 years, he didn't have a script. "You came," he whispered. The speaker in the handset made his voice sound tinny, like a recording of a recording. "I didn't come to talk about the case, Eric," I said. "The lawyers are handling that. The Sterlings are satisfied with the restitution. I came to ask you about the warehouse." Eric's eyes flickered, a ghost of the old spark returning for a second. "The gallery. You found the drive." "I did." "I wanted to give you the world, Viv," he said, his voice cracking. He leaned his forehead against the glass. "I saw how hard you worked for people who didn't appreciate your eye. I saw you making other people's brands famous while you stayed in the shadows. I thought if I could just get enough capital, I could build you a stage that no one could take away." "You didn't build a stage, Eric. You built a cage, for both of us." "I did it for you," he insisted, his voice rising. "The Alicia thing, she was just a transaction, a means to an end. I never loved her. I never even liked her. Every time I was with her, I was thinking about how much closer it got me to finishing your studio." I looked at him, and I felt a profound sense of pity. He still didn't get it. He still thought that love was something you could fund through a series of fraudulent transfers. "That's the mistake, Eric," I said softly. "You thought I needed a stage. You thought I was a backdrop that needed to be highlighted. But as a designer, you should know that the backdrop is what gives the subject its meaning. I didn't need a $3 million gallery to be seen. I just needed a husband who was real." I leaned in, my breath fogging the glass between us. "You told me that someone has to look more trustworthy to move up. But you forgot that trust isn't a design choice. It's the material the whole thing is made of. When you used my name and my signature to build your dream, you didn't just break the law. You broke the only thing that made the dream worth having. Eric stayed silent for a long time. He looked down at his hands, the same hands that had practiced my signature for 6 months until it was perfect. "What now?" he asked. "Now, the case goes to trial. You'll serve your time, and I'm going back to work, but not for the studio." I felt a surge of something I hadn't felt in a long time. It wasn't anger, it was autonomy. Mr. Sterling didn't just buy the debt, Eric. He saw my dossier. He saw the way I tracked the Andrew bot and the way I mapped the fraud. He offered me a position as a brand integrity consultant. I'm going to be the one who makes sure men like you never find a pixel to hide behind ever again. A bitter laugh escaped his lips. "So you got the top floor after all." "I didn't get it, Eric. I built it, out of the truth." I stood up and replaced the handset in the cradle. I didn't wait for him to say goodbye. I didn't look back as the heavy metal door opened to lead him back to his cell. As I walked out of the jail and into the late afternoon sun, the world felt incredibly sharp. The lines of the buildings, the shadows of the trees, the way the light hit the pavement, everything was in high definition. I went to my car and pulled out a small sketchbook. I opened to a fresh page. I didn't draw a gallery. I didn't draw a studio. I drew a single, straight line. It wasn't flat. It wasn't cold. It was a horizon. My name is Viven. I am a designer. I see the details that people try to hide, but I also see the beauty in things that are honest. My life isn't a project to be managed anymore. It's a story to be told. And for the first time in a long time, the signature at the bottom of the page is actually mine. I started the engine and drove toward the city. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over everything, and as the lights of the skyline began to flicker on, I realized I wasn't looking for a stage anymore. I was the light.